A shadow loomed over Charlie Morningstar, and she looked up from her paperwork to see her co-manager staring down at her. "Why, what's that frown for?" the radio demon asked, Cheshire grin wide as always. "Oh, it's nothing." She brushed her hair away from her face. "I was just thinking about everything that went down today." "I would think you'd be pleased at today's outcome." Alistair gestured around them, leaning on their shared desk with enthusiasm. "Another sinner checked in, an overlord repelled. You should be celebrating, my dear." With a snap of his fingers, their office changed to a festive, jazzy atmosphere, with streamers draping from the ceiling. "I didn't really do much of anything. You did all the heavy lifting." Again, "We both have our roles, my dear. You're the cheerful face of this experiment. Why, without your conviction, there would be a new resident at all." "My skills lean toward another focus. It's the same value, I simply have a different part to play," Alistair said as a celebratory tune echoed in the air and shadows danced around the room. A tiny shadow minion toddled across the desk, giving a toot on its small party horn and offering it to her. She took it gently, studying it in her fingers rather than playing it herself. Looking closely, she could see a latticework of runes flaking the air around the device, as well as across its surface. "I sometimes feel like I'm on the wrong ring," the princess admitted ruefully, rising and looking at the decorations haunting their space. Arcane etchings were everywhere, as if the pair of them were wandering through the words of a book. "Whatever do you mean?" Alistair asked, his smile thinning in genuine surprise. "I see your work and I just can't help but envy your craft. You dispatched that overlord and now all this? You make it look so easy." "Ah, flattery, quite the dish," Alistair chortled. No, I wouldn't call this sort of thing easy at all." With a flick of his wrist, the entire scene disappeared. Charlie fixed her business partner with a deadpan glower, and he simply shrugged in response. "I just feel like it's not enough, the strength I have. I want to give more and not have to rely on you to protect us all the time." "You don't believe you do enough for this wacky endeavor? Sweet girl, what else could you possibly do?" "Well, I was thinking," Charlie twined her fingers. "You had mentioned a while back that you thought I might have the aptitude for magic." Alistair's dark eyebrows shot up, but he remained silent, his eyes studying her. The kind you do?" the demure demoness added, her confidence waning. She'd had a kind of speech in her head to support her argument, but as she faced the other demon now, her entire line of logic vanished, leaving her a stuttering mess. "Geez, I feel like an idiot," she mumbled, turning back to her paperwork on their desk to steady herself. The letters under her fingers brought her comfort, There were citizens out there that needed help, many too afraid to come here for fear of attack. Granted, the fearsome radio demon had unofficially declared the hotel his territory, a factor she could bring as a selling point to Vaggy's unending annoyance. Still, it would be better to not have to rely on his powers forever. There was no way to know when Alistair's interest in this place would vanish. It made her chest tighten thinking about it, so she tried to put it from her mind as best she could. "Would you be willing to teach me?" Charlie asked, looking back to him. The dear demon was quieter than she could recall him being in the months she'd known him. Most often, he had some kind of quip or hum to fill the silence, or maybe a joke while he puzzled out an actual response. Charlie had spent the better part of her time knowing Alistair, trying to understand him, and although there was much about the man she still didn't know, she had gradually gleaned some insight regarding his mannerisms. He was expressive yet guarded. He valued control but also balance. He enjoyed the quiet while still being a showman who could appreciate performance. In many ways, he was a bundle of contradictions, much like herself. She'd figured he'd either leap at the opportunity to flex his powers and agree right away, or maybe shrug her off to protect his secrets, but she'd not anticipated utter silence. It unnerved her. "What use would you possibly have from my magic, dear?" the radio demon asked finally, his voice more careful than she would have expected. "Surely your lineage grants you far greater abilities than my own." Charlie drew in a breath. Was he suspicious of her? "I have to be really careful when I use the royal authority. I try not to unless I have no other choice," she admitted quietly. "I don't want my magic in contention with my dad's." "Oh?" Alistair's thin lip curled, the hum in his voice indicating he expected more of an answer. She really shouldn't tell him. It would be a vulnerability he could exploit should he ever decide to oppose her directly. Baggy would have a fit, railing at her that this was a stupid, dangerous idea, that he couldn't be trusted. But if Charlie wanted him to share his skills, she would have to share something of herself as well. "My father is the most powerful being in hell," the princess offered. "Naturally." "And, well, naturally that is due to his magic. He controls the pentagram that separates us from purgatory, and the elevator connecting the layered rings that make up the kingdom. As heir to such authority, simple voodoo should technically be beneath you, so far that it's almost insulting you would even ask to learn it." The radio demon's voice lowered. Charlie tensed in a way she hadn't since the day they met. "Are you insulted?" He hummed, leaning closer, invading her personal space as he wont to. "No, I don't think so. I'm glad. That wasn't my intention. As I said, almost insulted. Not quite all the way. Rather, I'm more intrigued than anything. You have a hesitation to use the full extent of your powers solely for your father's benefit. It's not just for him, it's also for me. Well, for everyone, really." He tilted his head, baiting her to continue. "Well, the royal authority is what governs hell. Not just my dad's, the other princes too. The hierarchy's members control their own territory, sort of like overlords, only on a larger scale. A prince for each ring, as it were. Yes. When they showcase their true power somewhere, they exercise authority, and that gives them a certain amount of control over that space. Too much control, and they establish dominion." Alistair's eyes glowed with understanding. "I take it your father's rebellion taught him that." Charlie nodded, pointing up. "It's the reason there is a gate now." Alistair huffed a laugh. "And here I thought it was because heaven was such an exclusive club." "Maybe that's part of it too?" The princess giggled at his joke, but her expression fell as she thought about her reply. "But the more precise answer to your question, If I constantly use authority to get my way, eventually it'll cause me to establish dominion. And Dad won't take kindly to that, I imagine. Would you? The quiet again as Alistair considered her question. His darker eyes flickered to her, examining her openly. His attention made her stomach clench in a strange way that wasn't fear, but was still terrifying all the same. If it were my heir, I would think such a takeover would be inevitable, he said at last. You're probably right, but I love my family and my kingdom, and don't want to bring war if I can help it. The radio demon's smirk was a narrow line. So exercise a lesser authority to maintain the peace. That does sound insulting when you put it that way, Charlie frowned. There are more insulting ways to refer to my magic, darling. He still hadn't answered her initial question. Would you be willing to teach me? Alistair folded his arms, rocking back as he deliberated with a low hum of consideration. Well, naturally there's the will to teach, but I think there would be other methods at your disposal, no? Charlie blinked as he leaned in, his hand pushing her hair away from her face. Your dour little friend could teach you combat with spears or knives. Even the effeminate fellow could show you firearms. Either technique would complement your existing arcane skills better than an additional focus in a separate form of magic. His fingers drifted to her bow tie as static vanished from his voice. A man can't help but wonder if you were interested in something else. Her face had to be the same color as her eyes, double damn him. No, it's just magic. I'm in a relationship, Al. The utterly dismissive look in his eyes made him look perfectly stoppable, but he withdrew his hand without any prompting. So you are, but you didn't answer my question. It's a parallel power to something I'm familiar with, something I can use as a means of restraint. The dear demon rolled his eyes. Tying yourself down, chaining yourself, doesn't seem particularly wise to me, he chuckled, making his way over to the window. Charlie frowned, folding her arms as she followed him across the room. Well, what else should I do? They both looked out across the hotel courtyard, to the lights of the city beyond. The pentagram glowed brightly in the fading light of the evening. In case you've forgotten, we are in hell, my dear. This is the rendered judgment for the lives of sinners. This world is a reflection of what we are. He tugged lightly on the thin branch of one of his antlers. The princess scoffed. You'd have me use my magic, knowing it would bring war someday? Knowing it would tear this plane apart? In case you've forgotten, I'm trying to save souls, not condemn them to further violence. You asked me if I would have you as a student. Answering the riddle of magic would be the most fundamental part of your studies. Her eyes widened. The riddle of magic? Alistair smirked. You're not familiar. Perhaps I'd misjudged your aptitude. Was he trying to antagonize her? Her jaw clenched, and she tried to keep her expression even. Considering that I've not studied voodoo, I can't say that I've heard of that philosophy, she replied defensively. His smile dropped slightly. She wondered if she might have antagonized him as well. It wouldn't be specific to a particular type of magic, but it applies to every magician. Anyone who would ask for the power of the arcane must answer it. Your previous tutor did you a great disservice, letting you use your sparks without knowing that much. I've never had one. All my skills I've developed on my own. Dad wouldn't teach me or allow anyone else to. She meant to keep the bitterness at bay, but it slipped through anyway. It was too dangerous. For him or for you? Charlie was getting tired and just wanted a straight reply, but Alistair loves games and would keep dancing around a specific answer if she pressed him for one. I told you, it's for everyone, she grumbled. I can only use my magic for a tiny bit. Too much and all my control will just crack apart. His maroon eyes seemed to see right through her, to all her faults and doubts. I thought learning your magic could help me better deal with mine, she whispered. Do you think the riddle of magic can be solved by the timid? His smile was mocking, and the princess felt anger shiver through her along with shame. If you believe yourself to be made of glass, then so it is. If you believe yourself to be weak, then you are. She'd had enough. Never mind, just forget it. Sorry to have bothered you, Charlie muttered stiffly, turning on her heel to leave. Movement slithered across the floor, and a shadow bloomed in front of her, taking a shape similar to that of the radio demon. It was darkness incarnate, red-tinted blackness. Its eyes and maw were blue flame radiating out of the pitch. Oh! Charlie stopped short to avoid bumping into the figure. It occurred to her that she was outnumbered, and she'd had the sense of being cornered despite standing in the middle of the room. Something hissed deep in her core, something old that she had desperately tried to distance herself from. That's an interesting trick, she offered with a disarming chuckle, trying to ignore the feeling. How are you doing that? Is it alive? I can't answer that, Alistair said behind her. The deer demon was a deceptively graceful man, practically as fluid in his movements as the spectre in front of her. And before she knew it, he was leaning over her shoulder from behind, his face so close to hers that she could feel his breath ghost across the side of her neck. I'd have to keep you if I did. He could have torn out her throat if he'd wanted. Charlie spun away, turning back to face him. I see. I'm sorry to have put you in that position, she offered, hoping her tone came across more diplomatic than anxious. The red on her cheeks was certain to betray her, though. Just as she had moved, he flowed right along with her, twirling her along in an impromptu dance as he took her hand in his. Don't misunderstand, my sweet. I wasn't calling you weak. I believe you to be exactly what you are. Nothing more, nothing less. But what was that exactly? She wondered as he spun her away from him, catching her hand and pulling her back to him. And don't misunderstand. There's nothing simple or easy about any of this. There's a great cost, and I should know. Why, I'm here after all. The blue-faced shadow leaned over his shoulder, grinning down at her before it swept around behind her, its umbral trail twining around them both as it circled them. Where there's a will, there's a way. So then, is there the will? This time his smile was more curious, waiting for her response. Charlie's red eyes widened. The conversation had spun, pivoting in its own kind of dance as he casually reversed their roles. Suddenly he was the one asking her if she was willing to learn from him, and this arrangement hinged on her answer. He'd the will to teach her, he said, but did she truly have the will to learn? A cold hesitation crept up her spine. Had she really thought this through as much as she'd believed? Would this work out as intended? Could she actually augment her abilities? Or was this just a fool's errand, and she was setting herself up to bring the very doom to her people that she was trying to avoid? Not to mention her becoming Alistair's apprentice would fundamentally alter the basis of their relationship, adding another, far more complex, layer. She had only just managed a steady equality with him as co-manager of the hotel. She and the radio demon were equals in that aspect. They shared an office, and even a desk, a sudden stroke of inspiration the princess was privately proud of, in order to keep balance in terms of authority in the hotel. There would be no balance here. Baggy would never forgive her. She ducked her lighter eyes away from his darker gaze. From their dancer's pose, one of his hands gripped her own, and the other around her lower back. If she retreated, he would let her go, she knew. He was a gentleman, and also wouldn't stand for prolonged physical contact without a clear purpose. But she didn't want to pull back, shy away. If someone else controlled her decisions, then that made her a pawn. She had to make choices for herself. She could feel Alistair's hand against her back, steady. The princess knew what she wanted to do, what she needed to do, not just for her people, but also for herself. One day, hopefully someday, a long, long time from now, she would be queen of hell. If she couldn't be strong in the face of one demon, how was she supposed to be strong in the face of an entire kingdom? I have the will. I won. Fantastic! Alistair smiled, and Shadow warped back to his side of the desk. Then say no more. Charlie's hand dropped back to her side. She felt giddy and nervous all at once, the conflicting emotions warring for control. It's only for as long as you feel like teaching me. I don't want you to feel obligated if it's a problem. Alistair conjured a piece of paper, writing something down. That problem isn't mine. It's more a matter of knowing you're certain what you want to get into. One mustn't bite off more than they can chew, after all. He looked up, his grin all teeth, as he sent the paper to who knew where. That's true. I appreciate your caution, Charlie said evenly. Perhaps before we formally begin, we can get a sense of your predisposition to the challenges my magic can bestow. Misunderstandings can be quite disastrous in the world of the arcane, darling. A free lesson? He warped to the other side of the desk as though he'd walked straight through it. You can think of it more like a tutorial. There's always a chance this won't be a good fit in the end. Best to find out now before we're truly committed. That was almost sweet, like he was trying to protect her from something she'd regret. Charlie felt heat on her cheeks, then reminded herself of who she was dealing with. No, it wasn't him being kind. This was the radio demon. He was playing with her. So this is like a trial? He grinned wide. The first of many, my dear. That is the way of it. Magic is a road guided by talent as well as will. He tilted his palm in an upward plane. It's uphill the whole way. You can't make progress without intent. Charlie's dark eyebrows narrowed. You're telling me it's not possible for someone to be tricked into doing something they don't mean to? I find that hard to believe, no offense meant. None taken. And of course, there are suckers out there who trifle with the arcane and pay their price. Would you fault a carpenter for seizing their due payment for a project when a patron commissioned their skill and received the product? No. Those who would control magic run the risk of it controlling them. Is that the fault of the magic? No. He had been slowly moving around her as he spoke, gauging her reactions. She followed his movements, orienting her body towards his. She had to face him head-on, step following step. It was another kind of dance in the end. If someone makes an unwise deal with me, is that my fault? Alistair murmured. Charlie frowned. That was not the same as the other points. He had to know that. Motive mattered, magic or not. But if she answered wrong, would he take that as an insult or a lack of resolve? Or worse, both. His head tilted. I'm surprised at your hesitation, he grinned, but you couldn't tell the emotion behind it. Oh, well, I suppose if they were provided their due caution and had a thorough understanding of their working relationship with you, and you were being truthful about how everything operates. Is that all? Alistair asked, tin riding through the background of his voice. Charlie looked back at him, rose-colored eyes studying him. She had originally proposed learning from him, and now here she was suggesting he was untrustworthy. A misstep. The princess swallowed, opting for a more measured answer worthy of their closer relationship, if he'd still have it. You're not responsible for anything you haven't promised. Wisdom comes from prudence, and an arrangement requires multiple parties to agree together. If the deal is unwise, then that's not your fault. Alistair's head quirked as he considered her response. A suitable reply for my future pupil. I would hope to have at least a modicum of respect considering how I do business. Rules work both ways, don't they? Yes. Does it displease you that I work in soul dealings and riddles? Such a direct question, Charlie thought, a wave of tension riding down her spine. This would almost certainly decide if she passed his trial or not. Charlie resisted the urge to look away, weighing her options. It's not my place to try and change how your magic operates. I came to you for the opportunity to learn. Your magic is what it is, how it is. I could perhaps revise how I orchestrate those dealings, if you wish. The radio demon's maroon eyes were piercing, and she felt naked. She resisted the urge to hide herself, unable to bear the idea of showing weakness to the other demon, any more than she already had, anyways. Charlie leaned against her desk to steady herself, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. The piece represented so much of her efforts here, her work, her pride, her will. Her will had made the radio demon linger, even if he didn't believe in her goal. She closed her eyes, choosing her words carefully. I wish for this hotel to succeed, she replied. It had to be possible. Nothing lasted forever, not even eternal punishment. If being souls could be avoided, then the opposite had to be true. There had to be more than one way for souls to leave hell. She felt a hand on her chin, tilting her head up. He could have kissed her if he'd wanted. His maroon eyes were gleaming. We must start at the very beginning with magic, mustn't we? In order to get properly acquainted? His voice was a low rumble, practically a purr. If you could hear her heartbeat, she was doomed. Pay attention, Charlie told herself. You knew what you were walking into. It's a game. Everything about him is a game. So how did she win? By matching him where it counted, step by step. He was a good dancer, and so was she. Pride was her home. It was a fragment of her very soul. Teeth were in her essence, and they gnashed at the challenge. He was playing a game with her, asking a riddle. A riddle wasn't just an answer, it was also a question. So what was the question? The curl of his lip told her he had given her a hint already. Pay attention, Charlie. What had he said? He was asking about beginnings, getting to know her, just as she was wanting to know his magic. Your magic, what's its name? The princess asked. Charlastor regarded her silently, but his smile was soft, almost, dare she say it, pleased? What a daring question! Nox Magia is a term with many meanings, my sweet. Nox Magia, she thought. That's his magic's real name. There had been a trap there all along, she realized now, and swallowed the blow to her pride. He had let her call it otherwise during their first meeting. He'd agreed so easily to her terms of not using any voodoo, because she had never given him a condition that truly bound him. She could never be that foolish again. The radio demon glanced to his shadow, which grinned wide at the both of them, trailing about them like a ribbon tying them together, before it vanished back into the floor at his feet. Charlastor clapped with a flourish. Let's start next week. I have some things to attend to properly prepare. I hadn't expected an apprentice after all. Charlie nodded. All right, that's totally fair. This can be in your own time. I don't have any sort of deadline or anything. He escorted her to the door, holding it open for her in a gentlemanly fashion. Well then, I'll see you tomorrow for our usual work bright and early. Thanks, Al, she nodded to him, offering a small smile. Have a good evening. Oh, and one more thing before you go, he said. She halted in the doorway, looking back. The door was open to the empty corridor, but she might as well have been flat against the wall for how the dear demon stared down at her, his arm braced on the doorframe beside her. His smile was a narrow line. I do expect that you'll keep this arrangement private, my dear. His eyes were practically glowing against the darkness behind him. There would be consequences if it were noticed. She was practically under his chin from how he loomed over her. She could have torn out his throat if she'd wanted. The startling thought brought a rush of heat from her stomach all the way to her toes. Of course I will, Al. You have the right to your secrets. His smile widened back to his typical Cheshire grin. I believe you'll do wonderfully. I think this is going to be quite entertaining. She offered a quick flash of a smile for courtesy's sake, then slipped back down the hall. As she left to go about her evening, she put her hands on her cheeks, rubbing them to hopefully disguise any lingering heat. She'd swing by her room before she went to meet up with Maggie. She needed to splash some water on her face, clear her head. The radio demon had agreed to take her on as his apprentice. Her overwhelmed thoughts combed through their encounter as she led herself into a room. What was the riddle of magic? Charlie locked her door. Now that she could ponder things on her own, she'd realized she'd made a mistake. There would still be a kind of balance between them. She'd be learning the secrets of Alistair's craft, Nox Magia. By studying its discipline, she would unlock its mysteries and undoubtedly learn more about the man himself. And by teaching her, he would be learning about who she was as well. They would both be exposed, vulnerable, as they learned from the other. Perhaps that was part of the riddle of magic, too.